Tung and Ha are a married couple living in a small riverside village where life is simple but filled with laughter. Tung is a delivery driver for a small company. His job isn't luxurious but enough to provide for the family. Ha is a kindergarten teacher who spends her days at school with little children, loving them as if they were her own. They have been married for 7 years, a time not too long, yet enough to understand and cherish every tear and laugh together. Their small house at the end of the village road is modest, but always filled with cheerful voices. This peaceful life continued day by day until one fateful evening changed everything. That day, Tung was assigned a long-distance delivery by his company. He left home early in the morning, leaving Ha with his usual affectionate instructions. "Stay home safe. I'll be back a bit late." Ha smiled as she saw him off at the gate, not forgetting to tuck into his pocket a lunchbox she had prepared the night before. Tung turned back and lightly tapped her forehead, teasing, "You're always so meticulous, as if I'm going off to battle." Ha laughed, her eyes sparkling. "I just want you to eat well." That same day, Ha had an extra class at the house of one of her students. She rode her bicycle on the familiar road leading to little Na's home, her beloved student. However, fate cruelly intervened. As she crossed an intersection, a truck suddenly came speeding toward her, unable to brake in time, crashing into Ha. The violent collision threw her to the ground, blood spreading across the road. The truck stopped, and the horrified driver rushed to her side, but all that remained were the heart-wrenching cries of the surrounding villagers. Tung received a call from the hospital while stopping for lunch at a roadside eatery. His phone vibrated continuously with an unfamiliar number. He answered, and an urgent voice on the other end said, "Are you Tung? Your wife just had a serious accident and is in critical condition at the district hospital. Please come immediately." The phone seemed to slip from Tung's hand. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. He leapt to his feet and rushed to turn his truck around, disregarding the long and treacherous road ahead. When Tung arrived at the hospital, Ha was in the operating room, her face pale and motionless. Through the glass window of the emergency room, Tung felt as if his heart were being crushed. A doctor emerged with a grave expression and said, "We've done everything we can. She's not in danger of losing her life, but her spine is severely damaged. She won't be able to walk again." Tung felt as if he had fallen into an abyss. Those words were like daggers piercing his heart. Yet, he held back his emotions and looked at Ha through the glass, her eyes closed and her breathing faint. When Ha regained consciousness, her eyes were lost and frightened. Tung sat beside her, holding her hand. He smiled, his voice gentle but trembling. "It's okay. I'm here. Everything will be fine." Ha looked at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't say a word, only gripping his hand tightly as if clinging to her last shred of hope. From that day on, their lives took an entirely different turn. Ha was no longer the lively woman she once was. She was bedridden, relying on Tung for all her daily needs. The initial days after the accident were filled with tears and agony. Ha couldn't stop blaming herself, while Tung had to shoulder the burden of work and taking care of her. During the day, he roamed the roads for deliveries. At night, he would cook meals, clean Ha, and change her clothes. Despite his exhaustion, he always tried to smile whenever he was with her. Tung cheered her up with funny stories or played her favorite movies, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't hide the pain in his heart. There were nights when he woke up to see Ha turn toward the wall, her frail shoulders shaking in the darkness. He would silently hold her, whispering, "Everything will be okay, don't worry." But deep down, he knew things would never be the same. Financial pressures began to weigh heavily on Tung. The medical expenses and treatment for Ha grew day by day. His delivery job was no longer sufficient, forcing him to borrow money from friends and family, even mortgaging their small house. The gossip from neighbors also started to emerge. Poor Tung, so young but stuck with a disabled wife. These words stung him deeply, yet Tung never let his weariness show in front of Ha. Ha, on the other hand, lived in a constant state of guilt and torment. She knew how much Tung had sacrificed for her and felt like a selfish burden, tying him to a stifling life. Whenever Tung returned home, she tried to muster a weak smile, but her eyes betrayed the deep sadness within. She even considered divorce, but every time she tried to bring it up, she couldn't find the courage. She feared that without Tung, she would have nothing left to hold on to. Those days were a test of both their love and patience. Tung loved Ha with all his heart, but he was human too, with moments of doubt. Long, sleepless nights found him questioning himself. Was he doing the right thing? Was Ha truly happy, or was she merely enduring his sacrifices? Yet, every time he looked into her eyes, he brushed aside all doubts. We're husband and wife. I promise to take care of her for life, he reminded himself, as if affirming his own resolve. In the darkness of despair, Tung and Ha clung to each other like imperfect puzzle pieces that couldn't be separated. But little did they know, greater challenges awaited, challenges that would force them to confront their own hearts. After the catastrophic accident, their lives entered a new chapter filled with unnamed pain and struggles. Ha, once a vibrant and independent woman, was now entirely dependent on Tung's care. To Tung, Ha wasn't just his wife, but a lifelong companion. Yet now, she was a frail figure lying silently on the small bed in their quiet home. The first days after the accident were excruciating, not just physically, but emotionally. Ha couldn't accept the reality that she would never walk again. She fell into a deep depression, refusing to eat or talk to anyone, not even Tung. Her silent tears soaked her pillow every night, a testament to her indescribable pain. Tung, despite his sorrow and exhaustion, tried to be her unwavering support. He learned to care for Ha from the smallest tasks like cleaning her, changing her clothes, and feeding her spoonfuls of porridge. Every morning, he woke up early to prepare everything before leaving for his delivery job. His work became increasingly demanding as he bore the additional costs of Ha's medication and physical therapy. Each delivery took him down endless roads, his eyes fixed ahead, but his mind always worrying about the wife waiting alone at home. At night, no matter how drained he was, Tung would cook dinner, clean the house, and sit by Ha's side, telling her funny stories from work. Though he tried to make her laugh by playing her favorite movies, Ha's smiles were now faint and fleeting, devoid of their former light. Ha often said, "You don't have to do all this. I'm not worth such sacrifices." Tung would simply smile and hold her hand, replying, "You're my wife, my world. As long as you're here, nothing else matters." But love alone wasn't always enough to ease the pain. Tung's sacrifices couldn't escape the whispers of the villagers in their small neighborhood. Many times Tung overheard remarks like, "Poor Tung, so young but stuck with a disabled wife. Do you think he regrets it? Or, does Ha truly love him? Or is she just clinging because there's no one else?" Tung remained silent, walking past those comments, but they pierced his pride deeply. These pressures gradually wore Tung down. One time, while feeding Ha porridge, he quietly stared at her for a long time, his eyes filled with both love and exhaustion. Ha noticed and asked, "What's wrong? Is something bothering you?" Tung quickly shook his head and forced a smile. "Nothing, just eat a bit more." But inside he was flooded with unanswerable questions. Am I doing enough? Is Ha truly happy in this life? Or am I just holding on to something that no longer has meaning? Since the accident, Ha lived in a state of helplessness and constant guilt. She saw the fatigue etched into Tung's face every evening when he returned home after a hard day's work. Once, when Tung fell asleep in the chair beside her bed, Ha quietly watched him for a long time, tears streaming down her face. "He has sacrificed so much for me. I don't deserve this," she thought. This pain eventually turned into thoughts of freeing Tung. Ha began considering divorce. She believed that without her, Tung would be free to find another woman who could truly make him happy. But each time she tried to say it, she lacked the courage. She feared that losing Tung would leave her with nothing, no one to lean on. It was a brutal psychological battle that only she understood. One afternoon, Tung came home earlier than usual after finishing his deliveries early. As he entered the house, he saw Ha struggling to reach for an item on the table beside her bed. Her hands trembled and her eyes were red. Tung rushed to her side to support her, but what broke his heart the most was the sorrowful and helpless look in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to do something on my own," Ha whispered. Tung said nothing, only holding her tightly. But inside, it felt as if hundreds of needles were piercing his heart. He didn't know how to ease her pain or help her feel less useless. Days continued to pass, and both Tung and Ha had to learn how to confront their own pain. But neither of them knew that the real challenge still lay ahead, when their love would have to face doubts and wounds they had never imagined. In the darkness of fatigue and helplessness, they clung to love, hoping it would be strong enough to keep them together, no matter how uncertain the road ahead seemed. Gently unaware that day would change everything in his life, Tung's trip was smooth until he suddenly realized he had forgotten a lunchbox on the kitchen table. The truck had already traveled halfway, but the thought of eating dry bread made him uncomfortable. After some consideration, he decided to turn back home. It won't take much time, he told himself, speeding up on the familiar road. When the truck stopped at the house gate, everything was still as quiet as usual. Tung stepped inside, the atmosphere of the house so familiar that he didn't notice anything else. But as he approached the bedroom, he suddenly stopped. Through the slightly ajar door, an image froze him in place, as if turned to stone. Inside the small room, Ha was sitting on the bed, facing a man. The man wasn't a complete stranger. Tung had seen him in some old photos of Ha. His name was Hui, Ha's best friend from university. Tung remembered Ha mentioning Hui, but had never thought he would appear in their house like this. They sat close to each other, and what hurt Tung even more was that Hui was holding Ha's hand while she cried uncontrollably, her thin shoulders trembling. Tung felt as if everything around him was collapsing, a sharp pain radiating from his chest, spreading throughout his body, as if someone had just torn his heart apart. He didn't know what to do, standing frozen, his eyes glued to the scene in front of him. Gossiping neighbors' words suddenly echoed in his mind, clear and piercing like needles. A wife like this surely clings to her husband, not out of love. Inside the room, Hui gently comforted Ha, his voice calm and warm. Don't overthink so much. I know you're in pain, but I'll always be here, always help you. Don't torment yourself like this anymore. Ha sobbed, her voice choked. I don't want him to suffer because of me anymore. I'm not worthy of him sacrificing his whole life for me like this. He deserves a better life. Tung couldn't bear it any longer. Quietly he turned away, each step heavy as if weighed down by stones. He didn't want to step in, didn't want to face Ha or hear any explanation from her. Bitterness, doubt, and hurt overwhelmed his mind. In his head, the intimate images between Ha and Hui replayed like a painful movie that couldn't be stopped. He returned to the truck but didn't drive away immediately. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, nails digging into his palms until they ached. A part of him wanted to believe he had misunderstood, but how could he erase what he had just seen? How could he forget Ha's tear-filled eyes when looking at Hui? Tung felt betrayed and deceived. All his devotion and sacrifices over the years now turned into the greatest pain of his life. All day, Tung drove like a soulless man. The familiar roads suddenly seemed unfamiliar and blurry. He could no longer focus on his work, only thinking about Ha's words and He's presence in his house. What did she truly want? Did she still love him? Or was it all just endurance she didn't dare to voice out? These questions swirled in Tung's mind, trapping him. That evening, Tung came home later than usual. Ha had already gone to bed, or at least pretended to. He didn't wake her, just sat quietly beside her, looking at her thin face under the dim light. His heart was filled with conflicting emotions. Love, anger, hurt, and even a little fear. He was afraid that if he asked her, he would receive an answer he didn't want to hear. But he also knew that if he didn't confront the truth, he would never escape the doubts consuming him. The next day, Tung decided to talk to Ha. After dinner, he sat down in front of her, his gaze serious but filled with pain. Ha, he began, his voice deep and heavy. Yesterday I saw Hui here. Can you explain to me what's going on? Ha was startled, her eyes wide with fear. She hadn't expected Tung to know and hadn't expected him to ask so directly. She lowered her head, her hands clasped tightly together, her voice trembling. Hui is my best friend from university. He just came to visit, brought some medicine, and helped me while you were busy. There's nothing between us, really. There's nothing at all. Her last words broke into sobs, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tung looked at her, his eyes filled with doubt. Nothing at all? Then why was he holding your hand? Why were you crying in front of him? Do you know how I felt when I saw that? Do you know how much it hurt me? His voice choked, but his gaze didn't leave Ha. Ha couldn't respond immediately. She could only cry, her sobs echoing in the small room, suffocating the air between them. After a while, she choked out, I just feel like I'm not worthy of you. I don't want you to suffer because of me anymore. I've thought about letting go, but I didn't have the courage. I'm afraid of hurting you, but I'm also afraid I can't bear it without you. Ha's words felt like someone was squeezing Tum's heart. He didn't know what to do or what to believe. She hadn't betrayed him, but her torment and despair were what hurt him the most. Tum stood up and walked out, leaving Ha sitting there, her thin shoulders shaking with endless sobs. That night, Tum sat on the sofa in the living room, staring at the ceiling, his mind in turmoil. He knew he loved Ha, and he knew she loved him too. But their love was suffocating under misunderstandings and unspeakable pain. He wondered whether their love was strong enough to overcome it all, or if he had made a mistake trying to hold on to her. The answer was still unclear, but Tum knew one thing. Something had to change, and he had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That night, Tum sat silently in the dark, his eyes following the faint streaks of light from the street lamp outside the window. His heart was heavy, choked with conflicting emotions he didn't know how to untangle. Ha was still in the bedroom, perhaps cried to exhaustion and fallen asleep, but her sobs echoed in his mind, reminding him of the undeniable distance between them. The next morning, Tum woke up earlier than usual. He didn't cook breakfast like he usually did, or prepare for his delivery trip. Instead, he sat down across from Ha, his gaze serious but filled with sorrow. Ha looked at him, her eyes red from a sleepless night. I need to talk to you, Tum began, his voice deep and heavy. Ha nodded slightly, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. I need time, Tum said, each word falling heavily. I think we both need time to think about everything. I'll go away for a few days. Don't worry, I'll come back. Ha looked up, her eyes showing a hint of panic. Where are you going? Is it because of me? I'm sorry. I don't want to hurt you, she said, her voice trembling, tears glistening in her eyes. Tum shook his head, taking her hand. No, I don't blame you, but I need to figure out what to do so neither of us feels this way anymore. Rest and don't worry. I'll be back. He stood up and walked out the door before Ha could say anything more. His heart felt like it was being torn in two, but he knew if he didn't do this, they would both continue sinking deeper into pain without a way out. Tum drove toward the countryside where he had delivered goods many years ago, a peaceful place with vast rice fields and small houses scattered along dirt roads. He rented a small room near a river, deciding to spend a few days reflecting on himself and the love he had nurtured for years. During the day, he sat by the riverbank, watching the gentle flow of water and listening to the wind rustling through the bamboo. At night, he lay on the small bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind filled with conflicting thoughts. He remembered the early days when Ha had just had her accident, lying motionless in the hospital bed, her eyes full of fear. He had once promised her he would never leave, would take care of her for life. But now, he began to question whether his love truly made her happy or only caused her more anguish. One afternoon, while walking along the village road, Tum suddenly saw an elderly couple sitting on their porch, peeling corn they had just harvested from the garden. They didn't say a word, just silently worked, but their glances at each other, Tum returned home on a stormy night. The road leading into the village was pitch black, illuminated only by the light from his motorbike's headlamp reflecting off the rain-soaked path. He stopped his bike in front of the gate, took off his raincoat and stepped inside. The house was cold and silent, but as he entered the bedroom, a scene stopped him dead in his tracks. Ha was lying on the edge of the bed, struggling to reach for a glass on the bedside table. Her hand trembled, and her pale face was drenched in sweat. Tum rushed to her side, catching her before she could fall. What are you doing? Why didn't you call me? Tum yelled, his voice shaking with fear and heartbreak. Ha didn't answer. Instead, she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably in his arms. Tum carried her back to the bed, fetched the glass of water, and handed it to her. After she drank, he sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. Ha, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have left you alone like this. I can't bear seeing you in so much pain. You mean everything to me, and I will never let you endure this alone again. Ha looked at him, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I thought you wouldn't come back, she said, her voice trembling, each word like a dagger piercing Tum's heart. I thought you were tired of me. Tum squeezed her hand tightly, his eyes filled with determination. No, Ha, I will never leave you. No matter how hard it gets, no matter what we face, I will always be here with you. That night, Tum sat by Ha's bed, holding her hand the entire time. The rain outside continued to pour relentlessly, but inside, all the doubts and conflicts within him seemed to melt away. He realized that love wasn't just about sacrifice. It was about sharing, about facing every hardship together. The next day, Tum began planning changes in their lives. He decided to quit his job as a driver and open a small convenience store at home. He knew it wouldn't generate much income, but it would allow him to spend more time with Ha, take care of her, and help her feel like an essential part of life again. With Tum's encouragement, Ha slowly began to regain her spirit. She started assisting with organizing the store's inventory and doing small tasks that she could manage. Tum always praised her, no matter how simple the task, and his words of encouragement made Ha feel less like a burden and more like a true partner in life. Their life gradually stabilized, but Tum knew the road ahead would still be long and full of challenges. However, he was ready for it because he understood that as long as they were together, nothing could defeat their love. After that fateful rainy night, their lives seemed to turn a new page. Tum no longer let doubt and hurt cloud their love. Instead, he acted to create change. The decision to open a small convenience store at home was not just an economic solution, but a way for them to spend more time together. The early days of the new venture weren't easy. Tum had to borrow money from friends to buy goods and set up the basic necessities for the store. They only sold essential items like instant noodles, rice, cooking oil, and a few household products. At first, the neighbors in the village looked at Tum with curious and somewhat pitying eyes. He probably wants to stay home to take care of his wife. But how far can that get him? Such remarks occasionally echoed behind Tum's back. But this time, he didn't let them bother him. He simply smiled and continued his work. Ha, who initially stayed in bed, gradually began to participate in light tasks in the store. She couldn't move around much, but every time Tum pushed her wheelchair to the front of the counter, she would help arrange items on the shelves and check the stock. These small contributions made Ha feel valuable and capable of contributing to their shared life. Every time she accomplished something, no matter how minor, Tum never hesitated to praise her. "You're amazing, Ha. I couldn't have done it as well as you," he would say. His words of encouragement not only made Ha smile, but also gave her more motivation. She no longer felt like a burden to Tum. Instead, she began to believe that she could still be an essential part of his life. On slow days at the store, Tum would push Ha's wheelchair out to the porch. They would sit there together, watching the neighborhood kids play and sharing stories about their day, even if it was just about trivial things. Those moments brought them closer than ever. Over time, their efforts began to pay off. The small store became a familiar place for the villagers. The looks of pity from the neighbors were replaced with admiration. People started seeing Tum as a role model, a devoted husband, and Ha as a strong woman who refused to give in to her circumstances. Some even openly told Tum, "You're such a good husband. Your wife is lucky to have you." Tum would humbly reply with a smile, "No, I'm the lucky one to have her." Life slowly settled into a routine, but Tum and Ha knew it would never be entirely easy. Financial difficulties always lingered, and life's challenges occasionally tested their love and patience. One morning, while arranging goods, Tum received a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end surprised him. "Tum, it's me, Hui. Can we meet? I want to talk about Ha." Hui, the name that once made Tum feel uneasy and hurt. After everything that had happened, Tum no longer held jealousy or anger towards Hui, but he still couldn't feel completely at ease about him. After a brief moment of thought, Tum agreed to meet. They arranged to meet at a small cafe in town. When Hui arrived, he looked tired, but his eyes were sincere. He began with an apology. "I'm sorry for coming to your house unannounced. At that time, I just wanted Ha to feel less lonely, but I didn't realize it would hurt you. Tum looked at Hui calmly. I'm not angry, but I want to know what you and Ha talked about that day. Hui sighed, his eyes filled with emotion. Ha told me she always feels like a burden to you. She's afraid you're sacrificing too much and doesn't dare to share those feelings with you. I just wanted her to understand that you love her, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love. Hearing Hai's words, Tum felt a sense of relief. He realized Hui wasn't someone trying to interfere in their lives, but rather a friend who genuinely wanted to help Ha through her pain. Thank you, Hui, Tum said, his voice gentle but firm. But I want you to understand that from now on, I'll be the only one doing that for her. I won't let her feel lonely or insecure anymore. After that meeting, Tum returned home with newfound confidence in his love. He no longer doubted or hesitated. Instead, he focused entirely on making Ha happy. Each day, he found ways to make her smile, to help her forget both physical and emotional pain. Ha noticed the changes in him, too. She no longer saw the weariness or pressure in his eyes. Instead, she saw a fierce, unshakable love. One evening, Tum pushed Ha's wheelchair to the backyard to watch the sunset. The sun slowly dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. A gentle breeze carried the soft fragrance of grass and flowers. Tum sat beside Ha, holding her hand. Ha, you know, no matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets, I'll never leave you. You are my whole world. Ha looked at him, tears streaming down her face, not of sorrow but of happiness. She softly said, Thank you, Tum. Thank you for not giving up. I know there were times you were tired, but you stayed. That means everything to me. They sat there together in the gentle light of the setting sun. The challenges still remained, but now they had learned how to face them together. Their love was no longer just about sacrifice or responsibility. It was about companionship and sharing, a true meaning of life that they had found together.